Hello and welcome to another episode of the Etch Play weekly live show. You're in the right place because it's Thursday and it's 4 p.m, which means we're live, bringing you all the latest games industry news, insight and discussion. I am your host for today. My name is Adam Burt. It's a pleasure to be with you here today, and I'm joined for today's show by a man named Ben. Hello, Ben.
Hello. How are you doing?
That's good.
Oh, we asked each other the same question at the same time.
Yeah. Are you good?
I'm good. Are you good?
I'm okay.
Okay.
I think we've got a lot of news to get through, so we will get started on that very shortly. But just to give you a little outline of what's coming up on today's show, we have all the latest news, as I said, and there's loads this week, all about Epic and Apple and all the kind of resultant stuff that's coming out of that court case that's going on as we speak. Later on in the show, we've got a Mortal Kombat review, which is the new film adaptation of the Mortal Kombat video game franchise. You can see what we thought of that. And then later on, kind of putting a cap on all the Epic stuff, we're talking about their free game strategy, which has been kind of unveiled as part of the court documents we've been looking at this week as well. Hello in the chat to Ben Gammon. Hello to Emma Budd. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate your time. And you could have chosen lots of things today. You could have chosen to be anywhere, and you chose to be here. So thank you very much. Ben, are you ready to do some news?
Let's do it. Let's get that ball rolling.
Okay, let's do it then. So our first bit of news, as I say, is just Epic versus Apple, and we're really kind of going to try and delve into this a little bit and maybe elucidate the core issue for you. So as a refresher, for those of you who aren't aware, Epic think that the cut that Apple take of every purchase made on iOS, especially Fortnite's in-game currency known as V-Bucks, is unfair, so they think that the percentage that Apple's taking is too much. And this has been escalating for a while, and ultimately resulted in Fortnite circumventing Apple's payment measures and Apple removing Fortnite from the App Store on iOS. This case has finally gone to court this week, where senior figures from both companies and related companies from right across the games industry have been testifying to Judge Yvonne Gonzalez-Rogers. And there's simply too much coming out of this case for us to talk about everything. Every day there's like dozens of stories based on the kind of discovery that the courts have made and the things they're talking about in testimony. But we're going to try and cover some of the biggest stories for you today and talk about what they mean for games and what they reveal about some of gaming's biggest companies. It's still too early to tell you which way the case is going to go, by the way. If you're interested in our opinion on that, we can't really tell.
We're not giving the verdict? Are we not giving the verdict?
No, we haven't got the exclusive on the verdict, unfortunately.
Oh, damn it.
But one of the cornerstones of the American justice system is this public record of documentation, which means that the game industry, which is traditionally very secretive, has been somewhat laid bare this week. Lots of internal documents and communications from Epic and also all of Epic's partners. So just been released onto the internet, basically, for anyone to look at. And there's no video from the trial, but there is audio. So essentially anyone can tune in at any point to listen to testimony from Tim Cook, Tim Sweeney, other figures at Epic and related games companies. So we're going to get started with our first story, and before we get into the documents and what they say, our first story is about the practicalities of this remote trial that's taking place and this kind of audio line, perhaps highlighting the technology gap that exists between the most ardent gamers and the wider public. When the court opened session, fans of Fortnite were able to invade proceedings and yell things like "Free Fortnite" on the court audio phone line, disrupting the start of the session by 20 minutes. So the idea behind this public line is you're supposed to be able to dial in and listen, but you're supposed to be muted. You're not supposed to have the ability to speak. And the court didn't quite get that right, and there was hundreds of people able to speak at will on this very crowded phone line for a little while there. But it just goes to show you how much fan interest there is in this in this story. What do you make of this, Ben?
Yeah, it's kind of like when the Facebook trial was happening, and people who are used to it are kind of like, these guys are asking how the internet works. Like, this is ridiculous. And then you get this, and it's kind of like, oh, we've got this high-profile court case between two large technological companies, and we can't work the phone line. It's pretty funny, but yeah, it's interesting in that it's getting, and I would say, younger people interested in this. Like, typically, like, what's going on in legal battles isn't of interest to young people, and albeit this is kind of humorous and what happened, but on a bigger note, it's getting people interested and watching what's going on in legal proceedings. So
yeah, and we can't recommend it. Like, you could get charged with contempt of court, so don't do it if you get the chance to shout something out during the Fortnite trial. Don't do it. Let's get into some documents and some hard numbers for you then. So one of the first court filings to come out have revealed that Fortnite made $9 billion in 2 years, which gives you some idea of why this court case is so important to both companies. We're talking about potentially a big cut of a lot of money. So, games are fun, games are a pastime for a lot of us, but they're also very big business, and there's a lot of money on the line here for both companies, which is why they would take it this far in the first place. I guess you have anything to say about that, Ben? You want to talk about the money at this point?
Yeah, so I won't go too deep into it because I'm going to touch on the money kind of things after the pre-recorded segment, but essentially earning, as you say, that's a whole chunk of money, and it seems maybe arbitrary 12%, 30%, that's a big lot of 9 billion. If you change that from 30 to 12, it's a huge amount more money in Epic's pocket, or it's a huge amount more money out of Apple's pockets here. You can see why they're fighting so hard for it, and it also kind of demonstrates kind of some of the stuff we'll talk about with the free game strategy and the money that's being invested into Epic as to why they're willing to do that investment, and that they're justifying that they can afford to do it.
Yeah. So one of the first companies to have their dirty laundry aired on the internet as a result of this is Sony. So a lot of their documents were released, internal discussions, emails, communications. Sony has a historic reluctance to allow cross-platform play. The company initially blocked it for Rocket League and Minecraft back in 2017. And this was also the case in Fortnite, but Sony did eventually relent and kind of allowed Fortnite to have cross-platform play on the PlayStation, and they do seem to be good friends now. However, documents reveal a number of senior Epic figures playing hardball in emails with Sony, culminating in a scathing email from Tim Sweeney, who's the CEO of Epic, which reads, I'm going to do a little quote for you here from the letter, "Frankly, we do not believe Sony's position is even legal. Epic will enable full interoperability between all platforms in Fortnite at a timely point in the future. Please understand that Epic firmly believes that this is a matter of legal right and moral duty. We are prepared to pursue this course with all available resources wherever it leads us and for however long." So pretty strong words there, and obviously they came to some arrangement, and the arrangement was also discussed in court, and Sony have made off with some good money here, because Sweeney confirmed in court testimony that Sony is the only platform out of the big three and major PC vendors that asks for cross-play compensation. So if you're cross-play on PlayStation, you have to pay Sony money to allow that to happen. He stated that Epic agreed to pay these fees to enable cross-play in the PlayStation version of Fortnite, kind of smooth things over after their initial rocky discussion. And yeah, that's like an interesting thing that's come out there, and I guess, Microsoft might be looking at their books now like, why didn't we charge for this? Because all the other platform holders are just happy for crossplay to be a thing. It's increasingly supported by fan demand and fan consensus, as they like crossplay. It enables them to play with their friends regardless of which console they have. So it's good for consumers, definitely, crossplay, but there's not always seemed that clear to vendors and platform holders that crossplay is a good thing to support or to allow. What do you make of this, Ben?
Yeah, I hope that rather than Microsoft looking going like, oh, we should have charged, I hope Sony looks at it and is like, we were in the wrong there, because I get about platform exclusives, like I'm not saying like that's obviously a different thing, but having a platform exclusive game is to try and get you to buy that console, which is understandable. But if you have a game which can be played across all of them, I don't know about the legal rights and whether Epic are right that it's a legal right, but for me as a consumer and looking at it for the wider benefit of the games community, I would like to see crossplay, and then the onus is on the consoles, your Sony's, your Microsoft, to make your console the one that people want to buy. If you stop people from doing it because they can't play the game on it, then that speaks a lack of confidence in your own product, and that takes away from the competitive nature. And as I said on the previous show, like competition makes everybody better. So I'd rather see that. I'd rather see the crossplay, and I hope Sony look and go, okay, yeah, we were probably in the wrong there, and not the other way around, that everyone else like, maybe I will start charging for that luxury.
Well, speaking about money and Microsoft, they've actually taken to the stand, or one of them has, one of their senior figures, which we'll talk about more in a second, and a lot of their documents have also been made public. Due to some of these documents filed in court, we now know about some of the internal discussions that Microsoft had about revenue at the company. So Microsoft's Xbox division takes a 30% cut on every digital sale on Xbox consoles, and their documents and discussions reveal that they had considered cutting it to 12%. So Etch Play fans will know that we recently discussed in one of our roundups that Microsoft did go on to introduce this change on PC, but not on Xbox consoles. And from the testimony, it sounds like this is unlikely to change. Laurie Wright, head of business development at Xbox, has been testifying and talking about the Xbox business model, and she revealed that Microsoft have actually never made money on the sales of an Xbox console. So selling a console is always a loss-leading exercise for them, which we knew was true at the start of generations, but we thought maybe wasn't always true. And she's revealed that all their profit comes from the commission that they make on games and subscriptions. So they thought about it, they discussed it, but they realised that in order to keep the Xbox division as a concept profitable, that the level of commission had to stay at 30% on the Xbox console side of things. So interesting that they've done that, and it creates like a slight difference between selling your game on PC through the Xbox store to selling it on the Xbox console. But I guess Microsoft, they've run the numbers here. they need that. They can't give it away. There's an investment in the Xbox as a console, as a platform, that they need to try and recuperate. There's a lot of Microsoft stuff, so I'm going to keep going. Microsoft's feud with Apple over xCloud on iOS got a rival kicked from the App Store. So in 2020, you might remember, Microsoft was battling to bring xCloud, also known as Xbox Game Streaming, to the iPhone and iPad, and the conversations had an unlikely victim, which is Shadow. You might have heard of Shadow before. It's a third-party cloud gaming app that lets you stream PC games to an iPhone or iPad from your computer. So emails between Microsoft and Apple revealed during the court case show that the Xbox maker was trying to, persuade Apple to allow xCloud, and basically said, "What about these guys? Like, how are they allowed to do what they're doing if we're not allowed to put ours on?" And Apple's response was basically, "Oh yeah," and they took down the other app as well. So Laurie Wright again was on the stand during this bit of the proceedings. And she says, "We were showing two examples where a game or application was able to exist, and we didn't understand why we couldn't. I believe they ended up pulling Shadow out of the App Store based off this email we sent until they submitted changes. That was not our intention, of course." xCloud, now called Xbox Cloud Gaming, is now available for beta on the web, which is a kind of workaround that allows the service to be usable on iOS devices. We checked it out last week. You can catch that on YouTube if you missed it. So yeah, a lot of Microsoft's internal dealings there revealed, which is interesting, both in terms of their revenue and in terms of their efforts to get xCloud to a wider audience on iOS. What do you reckon, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, you can't argue if they've run the numbers and they can show, hey, we need to take this much, otherwise we don't make money. I mean, I guess that's a big part of the argument in the Apple Epic thing, is they're like, hey, Epic, you're running a business model that won't make you any money. So I think that that's fair enough. I mean, all Microsoft could do it is to look to make changes that that they can take less and still make a profit, which I'm sure they would like to do to reduce their costs. Might not mean that they drop their percentage, but you can't argue with it. They're not going to actively do something which is going to lose them money, because why would you? That's just bad business. And in terms of the Shadow thing, I mean, Microsoft are going to look like the bad guys there, but they're trying to get their own product into the store, and you would, if you saw someone doing something similar, that would form the basis of your argument, is that you can't have that if we can't have this. Obviously, that's bad for Shadow that they got pulled, but I mean that was just a lack of consistency from Apple, which was brought to light, and unfortunately is just a casualty of a bigger conversation and a bigger argument going on. But I wouldn't really call Microsoft out for doing that as taking down a little guy. I mean, you would do that if it was.
I don't think they meant to. Yeah, I don't think there was deliberate. Yeah. Speaking of Xbox's relationship with their competitors, one last thing from them. I just thought this was interesting, just as a bit of kind of flavour about how the Xbox division is being run at the minute. So one of the things that came up during their document exposure was their internal review documents, kind of showing how thoroughly they examine their competitors. So one such document, a review of The Last of Us Part 2, which is obviously a PlayStation game, was full of high praise for the Sony published title and made recommendations to the wider Xbox team about the level of quality and polish that they should be aiming for with future AAA titles. And I've got a quote here from the review which says, "The visual quality and attention to detail in The Last of Us Part 2 is absolutely best in class in basically every area, and the overall presentation is significantly ahead of anything that other teams have been producing on console and PC." So interesting to see them looking at the competition, and I guess, you know, they're not kidding themselves. They're being quite honest that these guys have done something really good, really successful, really technically impressive. Why are we not doing that? It wasn't all positive though, with why the internal reviewer did also note that Naughty Dog, who are the developers, still can't seem to make decent gun combat in any of their games. So that's a little bit of sass that they didn't necessarily expect to go public. But I mean, I guess we would have probably assumed they were doing stuff like this. It's just strange to see it in public. You know, it's strange to see someone from Xbox openly acknowledging, yeah, we're playing these PlayStation games and thinking, how can we make games like this?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be surprised if they weren't doing that. In fact, it feels like it would be irresponsible to not be doing that. Because I mean, let's face it, games is a grown-up industry now. It's a very grown-up industry. It's still growing up, but it's getting there. And that's what you do in a sensible business. You look at your competitors and you look how you can get better. That's how you keep getting better. Going back to the competition makes everybody better. Why would you not be looking at your biggest competitors and seeing what they're doing well and how you can match it or improve, and look at what they're not doing well and do that even better to give you a better competitive advantage? Totally get your point, but it's weird to see it openly stated. But yeah, I'd be more surprised and really disappointed if they weren't doing it.
Yeah,
it would just be silly if they weren't.
We'll talk about this a bit more later in the show, but some other interesting tidbits that have come out of Epic's business records, I guess. So Epic expects the game store to be profitable by 2024, having recently admitted that the service loses money and has been the subject of heavy financial investment from the company. And the case continues, and although the companies involved all seem keen for further information to be redacted, like nobody really wants these secrets to be out there, apparently the judge is getting sick of fielding requests from tech companies to keep their documents secret. It seems very likely that we're going to get more and more later today and for the next few days as well, as these proceedings continue before they finish. So lots there to digest, and like I say, that's not everything. We just picked off some of the key stuff. We're going to go back to Epic later on in the show, so if you're interested in the Epic versus Apple case, stick around because we've got more on that later, and about how Epic have been pushing the Epic Game Store. But before that, we've got a couple of the news stories to get to. Going back to Sony have announced that they've invested and partnered with chat service Discord and disclosed that the platform will be fully integrated into PlayStation Network early next year. This follows some recent speculation that Microsoft considered buying the company outright in the last couple of months, which didn't materialize, and then Sony have swooped in there with a minority investment and made a little partnership deal there. So PlayStation fans can hopefully expect to see tighter Discord integration with PlayStation Network in future. Which sounds like a positive thing for fans of both those things. Anything to add, Ben?
No, I imagine that conversation was happening, and that was probably what contributed to them kind of pulling out of the deal with Microsoft. I'd be surprised if that happened and then Sony came in. I imagine that was a contributing factor. If they were like, we can still get a decent amount of money by partnering with Sony and remain completely autonomous, that felt like a better decision. So, yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Some more E3 news for you as we get closer to the summer and gaming's biggest trade show, the Electronic Entertainment Expo, which is all digital this year. Despite being initially announced as part of their publisher lineup, Konami have taken a step back this week and excused themselves from participating in proceedings. On Twitter, they released a statement which says, "Due to timing, we will not be ready to present at E3 this year. We want to reassure our fans that we are deep in development on a number of key projects, so please stay tuned." And when the ESA announced its plans for E3 last month, Konami was featured on the list of companies supporting the show, but they've now departed, obviously, and their departure puts them alongside other notable absences such as Sony, EA, Activision Blizzard, Sega, and Square Enix. So a few companies sitting it out this year. Bit of a weird one, but hopefully it will still be a good show and there'll still be lots for us to talk about on our show.
Yeah. We've talked about it before a couple of times on the show. Is E3 what is the future of E3? Is E3 longed for this world in the coming years? It'll be interesting to see what happens when it goes back to a live show next year, whether that allure brings people back, or if people are kind of going to be like, okay, we've not been there for the last couple of years, we really don't need to be anymore, and they do their own thing. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Lastly, on the news segment, we always like to end with a Games for Good story, and this is about our belief that games can be a powerful force for good in the world. We like to celebrate things that are about games or gamers doing exciting things that improve the world that we live in. And there's just a survey this week we wanted to highlight, and this is an Accenture survey of 4,000 people who play games. So the polls were people who asked let me rephrase that. The poll was sent to people who play games an average of 4 hours or more each week, and they were asked how much they agree with the following statement. And the statement reads, "I am more likely to play a video game if the game design company is socially responsible, e.g. they are involved in environmental sustainability efforts or are a champion for marginalised communities." And maybe against expectations from what you might read on Twitter, 66% of those people agreed and only 9% of them disagreed. So despite the often kind of vocal minority, I guess, on social media, it's clear that the gaming audience is diverse and broadly supports ethical responsibility, both in terms of diversity and in terms of tackling climate change and other environmental concerns. So that's good to see.
Definitely.
We're going to throw to a pre-recorded segment, which is a fun one this week, actually. It's a video review of the new Mortal Kombat movie, which has come out just recently and is hitting rental services in the UK as we speak. So stick around and we'll be back to talk about more about the epic stuff after this. But this is Mortal Kombat. See you in 5 minutes.
First learned about this 7 years ago. On a mission in Brazil to capture a wanted fugitive. When we got there, it tore through our unit in seconds. The target had superhuman abilities.
Hi, I'm Adam Burt from Etch and today I'm reviewing Mortal Kombat. There have already been 2 attempts to bring the Mortal Kombat experience to the big screen, starting in 1995.
It has begun!
You can't run from me, Shang!
I don't need to run.
The franchise has been a mainstay of gaming culture for decades, with an often convoluted plot about a fighting tournament that decides the fate of our world and several other realms. The campy storyline and extreme gore have served the games incredibly well over the years, and the first movie is considered by many to be a cult classic. There's always been a sense that this series had more to give and wasn't adequately reflected in the films.
Dragon marking? I think it's an invitation.
Coming out of Warner Brothers and launching straight onto HBO Max in the US, the new Mortal Kombat movie tries to do right by the franchise and in many ways is successful.
Cultures all over the world.
The film's protagonist is Cole Young, a character added purely for the film and not from the games. When he discovers that he has a dragon birthmark that qualifies him for the ancient tournament known as Mortal Kombat, he meets a cast of characters from the games. Almost the entire MK1 roster is here in some form, with one very obvious omission being Johnny Cage, who is clearly being saved for a sequel. We also get a couple of characters who were introduced in Mortal Kombat 2 and 3. The movie is obviously written by somebody who has considerable affection for the games, with references to the games peppered throughout, although in practice I found most of those bits to be distracting and too obvious. But it's nice to see that in the production they considered those little quirks and moments that make the game special and try to imbue the film with them too. And yes, Scorpion does do a get over here, which for fans of Mortal Kombat might be worth the price of admission alone.
Get over here!
As you'd expect, the gore that the franchise is famous for is given a significant amount of screen time too. This is one of the areas where the new film is a big step forward compared to the old ones, just in terms of being faithful to the source material and not watering it down to appeal to a wider PG-13 audience. In fact, the choreography and fight scenes in general are pretty good, with Sub-Zero being the real standout character. The general standard of acting is better in this film too, although it might be a stretch to describe any of it as good. And I think the fundamental issue with the film is that although I think it will be a success, and it has performed well so far in the States, it doesn't really have a lot of crossover appeal or do much for anyone who isn't already a big fan of the series. The acting's still mixed, the script is frequently clunky, but if you have nostalgia for the games or you're a fan of the current games, including Mortal Kombat 11, then you'll enjoy seeing some of those classic characters being brought to life on film. In particular, Sub-Zero and Scorpion get good treatment here, and Jax is given good material too. I was left wondering whether Jax should have been the film's main character, and if more of the film should have been centred around Scorpion's quest for revenge. All in all, this is a valiant effort, which has moments that will please and excite existing fans. Given the relatively low bar, it's also one of the best movie adaptations of a video game we've got so far. But as for whether it's a good movie, let's just say it's not quite a flawless victory. Welcome back, you're watching the Etch Play Weekly Live show, one of the best shows on the internet frankly, all about the latest games industry news and discussion from the world of games. So I'm joined by Ben Joy today, and Ben, you've been doing some research into some of the documents that Epic have, I guess, released during the court case that's going on at the minute between themselves and Apple. And you just wanted to, I guess, go through some of the stats and the data about what they've been doing with the Epic Games Store and what that means for games creators, game studios, and how they should maybe be approaching Epic as a platform.
Yeah, so it's there's some interesting stats that came out as part of the leaks. So I came about this by way of Simon Carlos's Twitter, and then it was in his Game Discovery newsletter as well. So essentially, a document that's come out as part of the trial is a list of games that Epic essentially paid developers for to do a 1 week free giveaway of those games, and then it's a list of games, what they paid for it, how many it got downloaded for, and then and the new Epic accounts that came off the back of that, and from that you can work out the user acquisition cost and the percentage of new users that got that game that were new to Epic. So it's really interesting reading. So just the overall figures, and just to clarify as well, this is from the end of December 2018 to the end of September 2019. So we don't have the stats for any later than that, but nonetheless, it's still really interesting reading. So in essence, Epic spent around $11.5 million on these titles. Of that, 104.5 million entitlements were claimed. So essentially, that's when a player gets one of the games and puts it in their library. Mm-hmm. There was just under 5 million new accounts to Epic Games off the back of getting the free trial. So essentially, a new person signed up to the Epic Games Store to get one of these free games, and it was the first time they did. And that equates to a user acquisition cost of $2.37 per person on average, which is a pretty good number. If you could grow your business by an extra 5 million people, only paying $2.37 per person, obviously that is a lot of money, but it's quite cheap per person to get them in.
It's incredibly low compared to, I would give you £2.50 to bring a viewer to this show.
Yeah.
And I'm not the richest company, one of the richest companies in games.
No. And that's an offer Adam is putting out to anybody in the chat. So if you can bring someone to the show next week, Adam will personally give you £2.50 for every person.
Yeah, if they follow us, I'll give you £2.50. There you go. It's a verbal contract.
Yep. And obviously, in this number, it ranges massively from what was paid for a game and the amount that they brought in. So one comparison I just wanted to bring up, which shows kind of the difference that it can make. So Celeste, Epic Games paid $750,000 to have Celeste to give away for free, and that generated 62,000 new accounts for Epic Games, so not bad. There was 2.7 million entitlements of Celeste. But if you compare that to Rhyme, which they only paid $45,000 for, that brought in 95,000 new users. So the acquisition cost is phenomenally different there for the two of them. 45,000 for 95,000 new users, or 750,000 for 62,000 new users.
Yeah.
So the whole scale is crazy. The one that performed the best was Batman Arkham. They paid $1.5 million for that, and that brought in 613,000 new users. It was Subnautica actually that was the best. They paid $1 million for Subnautica, 1.4 million, sorry, and that was 17% of people who downloaded that were new. Cost per acquisition for that was $1.74. So, and there was some duds in there. Not saying that Celeste was a dud, but
I love Celeste.
Yeah.
If you're watching, Maddie Thorson, I love your game.
Yeah, so that's not a rip on the game, but in terms of how it performed for Epic, they paid a lot of money for not a lot of return compared to some of the others, and that and it was something that Simon Carles commented on in his commentary in his newsletter. It's really interesting the way that these deals have come about, and obviously we don't have the full facts of who approached who. Did people go to Epic and offer? Did Epic go to the studios and just offer for the games? But it comes back to that perceived value. So like for the makers of Celeste, it might not have been worth any less for them to accept off Epic. That was probably a hard. We won't accept anything less because we're comfortable not being on there unless you pay us this. Whereas for say the makers of Rhyme, $45,000 for doing not a lot really, other than giving the game, could have been huge for them. That could have given them way longer on their runway and essentially made them a lot more comfortable than they would have been. And it comes back to what Simon was saying, as don't look at this as free money. Yes, it's great that you can get this, and he referred to it as found money. And the problem you typically can see, and what this highlights, is that think, oh well, we wouldn't have had this money anyway, so an arbitrary number is fine, rather than thinking about, okay, what value is this actually going to be to the platform that is going to take it? Whereas if you for Rhyme, they paid 45,000 and it gave them nearly 100,000 new users to Epic Games. That's of huge value to Epic Games. So could they have said, actually, we want 100,000?
Yeah, I mean,
they possibly could have got it, but then the problem you have is if you're too aggressive, then do Epic walk away? And if 45,000 is still a lot, I think it's really a call to indie devs to just consider your negotiating position a little bit stronger. Obviously, we don't know how it went on. They could have been offered a lot less, and 45 could have been what they bumped it up to. They could have, they could have built up their offer, but it's really interesting reading to see the differences of what was paid for games and the way they performed. Because obviously, this is all done up front. Epic Games could have paid $1 million for something and nobody got it, and that's the risk that they take. Because I guess Epic Games are taking almost all of the risk. I think it's safe to say that Rhyme probably wouldn't have sold $45,000 worth of games had they not gone on Epic Games Store. It's not like they would have had that money anyway. It's just really interesting and to see that what the negotiations possibly could be going forward now this data is out there, because we've always said with Game Pass, we don't really know, and Xbox have said the deals are all over the place. It's not a fixed fee. So
yeah, and I think people at home will be surprised at how low some of these numbers are. Like £45,000 that's not a lot of money. Like that's
no, not
in the grand scheme of things. I obviously, if you're an indie and you have to make a choice to keep your studio alive, then you might be forced into taking a deal that's not great for you. But that is far lower than I think people expected, especially given the recent news we've heard about Epic Games as a loss-making vehicle, the amount of money they're putting into it. I guess what's interesting is we don't have all the data here. Like, we don't have Grand Theft Auto 5, for example. How do the negotiations around that go with a game that, while old, is one of the biggest media franchises in the world, and also with a company like Rockstar, who probably are used to playing a little bit of their own hardball when it comes to negotiating positions, when it comes to doing deals with platform holders. They're very experienced in that regard. So there's a kind of a whole other side to it as well that we haven't seen, at least not yet. And I'm imagining that we might get more along these lines through the court case, or we might not. But yeah, it's interesting regardless to see just the differences. Like you say, it's the comparison which is fascinating. It's the how are Epic deciding what's worth money to them? They must be making a value judgment, and it's going to be somewhat subjective. It's almost like gambling. They're putting money on a number on the roulette wheel and seeing which games have the popularity to justify the bet that Epic has placed on them, and I guess they can afford to do it.
Yeah, I mean, by way of comparison, from Warner Brothers, they paid, as I said, 1.5 million for Batman Arkham, which brought in 600,000 new people. They also paid Warner Brothers 300,000 for Lego Batman, which kind of flopped. It only brought in 46,000 new users, and of that, only 1% were of the total that got Lego Batman. Only 1% were new to Epic. So essentially, they paid 300,000 for not a lot, but they took that gamble. You're absolutely right. Epic are taking almost all of the risk. So it's fair to say that you can see why some of them were probably hardball negotiations, especially, and rightly or wrongly, probably wrongly, with the indie devs, that they can play harder ball because they know that the indie devs can afford to take less and probably don't want to push it and walk away from a deal, which for them is still a lot of money, even though really if they were a bit stronger in negotiating, they probably could take more money for it. But yeah, all the risk is on Epic's side, and as we know, they're not making money at the moment. The Epic Game Store is still losing money, so they're pumping money in the hope, and it's more than hope. They've also got a business plan that they expect it to eventually start making money.
Here's their business plan. Come on.
As we've said, they expect to be profitable by the end of 2024, and they're not moving away from that position. They still expect that to be the case. And what's interesting with the numbers is, and it's not as black and white as this, so we know Epic take a 12% cut of revenue from everything sold. Their user acquisition cost is $2.37 for these games, running very, very crude maths. That means each of these new accounts, if they spend $20-ish, they've made the money back on these new users, and that has paid for this. Now, it's obviously not as simple as that. Not every single user who signs up is going to go on and spend $20. Some will spend more, some will spend less, some might not spend any. And obviously, it's not quite as black and white as, okay, they take 12%, so that's covered the cost. That 12% is to pay their staff and keep running as a business. It's not just the cost of games. So it's not quite as black and white as that, but to simplify it, those are kind of the numbers. And that leads into one of the arguments that I'm sure Apple are going to say, is that, okay, you are bringing in all these users for free. Are they going to buy anything? Or are they just coming in, getting the free titles and going away? And then when more free titles come in, and they're just building up essentially a library of free games that they have got from you and not actually spending any money. Because while it is valuable to Epic to grow their fan base and grow their users on their platform, if they're growing large, but they're growing for people who don't spend money, then that's not going to be sustainable in the long run. And I'm sure Apple may have already made that argument, but if they haven't, I'm sure that's an argument that they're going to make.
Yeah. One of the other arguments they're making in the court case at the minute, which I think is interesting, and we talked about how Xbox have been on the stand. The judge is interested in the potential implications of the case. So if, for example, they decide that iOS should be more open and you should be able to publish things on there without going through the App Store, the judge is basically saying, well, how is that different to the way that an Xbox works or the way that a PlayStation works? Because they have their own closed systems, and a lot of the court case, I think, is going to come down to semantics about, is it a general purpose device? Is it a specific gaming device? Because in the old days, it was simple. The Xbox, it was a gaming-only device, and you could play games, and that's all you could do with it. There wasn't even a digital store at that point. But now, they increasingly are multimedia platforms. Xbox essentially runs Windows under the hood. So I think she's also Yvonne Gonzalez-Rogers, who's a savvy lady who joined in this case. she's looking at it and she's like, if we make a ruling here, does this have knock-on effects for, the whole tech industry and anyone that makes hardware that's, closed in this way? So lots of interesting stuff to think about, and I'm sure there'll be more in next week's show, but we'll try and pepper in some other stuff if you're sick of Epic and Apple, so don't worry. This has been the Etch Weekly Live Show. That's us for today. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you've liked the show, if you like Mortal Kombat review or any of the news we've talked about today, make sure you follow us here on Twitch. If you're watching us live, it's a purple button down in the corner. It's down there right now. You can press it. You'll be notified whenever we go live. And if you're new to the show, I promised earlier in the show I would pay new people £2.50 or whoever refers them. So I've said something. Just contact me for your money.
£2.50 for everybody.
For everyone in the world. Maybe not that. But yeah, just get in touch if you want your money. And if you're watching us on YouTube on Catch Up, you can also subscribe to us there, and we get notified whenever there's a new video for you to watch. So that's good too. This has been the Etch Weekly Live Show. We're here every Thursday at 4 p.m. So make sure you tune back in, and we will see you again very soon. Take care of yourselves, and if you're here in the UK, don't forget to vote. Go and vote. And we'll see you next week. Bye.